General. And we will start with Scott Benton.
Question number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I'll answer questions 1 and 11 together. This government is committed to delivering justice for victims of serious violence, and I can confirm that the CPS has prosecuted over 103,000 cases of serious violence, firearm offences and homicides in 2022, with a conviction rate of over 84%.
Scott Benton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There have been a number of knife crime incidents in Blackpool over recent weeks which have concerned my constituents, not least a disturbing case in which a man was arrested after carrying a 16-inch machete. What action is being taken by the CPS to reduce knife crime offending both in Blackpool and across Lancashire as a whole?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very grateful to my honourable friend and pay tribute to him for his interest and for his knowledge in this area, not least because he always seems to get drawn for these questions week in, week out, and I pay tribute to him for that. Of course, the CPS has been instrumental in the serious violence reduction order pilots, which are aimed at reducing knife crime. And it's right to say that these orders will provide an extra tool to help crack down on violent crime, and the CPS look at both breaches of that and also the orders originally. Mr. Speaker, the Law Tour next week is in fact visiting the North West CPS area, which is both my honourable friends and also, Mr. Speaker, it is yours. You'd both be more than welcome to join us on that tour and to see the CPS and the police working together on this issue.
Ian Levy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents and I have been deeply shaken by recent incidents of violent crime in my constituency. Losing a loved one to senseless violence is a tragedy that no one should ever have to endure. Will my right honourable friend please agree to meet with me to discuss these cases that have caused concern to my constituents and how we can better support victims and their families by ensuring the prosecution of violent crime is a priority?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and I pay tribute to him for his hard work on behalf of his constituents. And of course, Mr. Speaker, it is right to say that tackling serious violence and improving the support that we offer to victims is a priority for this government. That is shown not least through the Victims and Prisoners Bill and the revised Victims Code. And of course, I'll be very happy to meet with my honourable friend to discuss this further.
Jim Shannon.
Speaker, I thank the Minister very much for his response to those questions. Northern Ireland has seen more than its share of violent crime, but in relation to the knife crime that both the honourable gentleman referred to, in Northern Ireland we've seen an increase in the number of knife murders, of attempted murders, of those who are carrying knives or other sharp instruments. So can I ask the Minister what opportunity he has had to discuss these matters, as I know he's a very dutiful Minister, with the pertinent Minister in Northern Ireland to ensure that we can also see some benefit from this as well. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman. May I, in turn, return the compliment to him and pay tribute to him for his diligence in this House and for all that he does. In fact, the Attorney General has had very close links with Northern Ireland, and recently both the Attorney and I, and also the Advocate General for Scotland, had the privilege of being called to the bar in Northern Ireland. I'm determined to keep those conversations and channels open, and he will know that the Home Office is consulting now on knife crime with a closing date of the 6th of June.
Dr. Rupert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Number 2, please.
Mr. Speaker, with permission, I will answer questions 2 and 5 together. Tackling violence against women and girls remains one of the government's top priorities. We're doing everything possible to make our streets and homes safer for women and girls. Since the launch of the Joint Action Plan, we've seen a significant increase in charge volumes for adult rape since January 2021.
Dr. Rupert.
I thank the Minister, but more than 1 in 9 rape prosecutions were dropped last year because victims withdrew their support, crushed by what can be a 3-year wait for their day in court and the humiliation of victim blaming. So will she fix these and accept the Joint Inspectorate's conclusions that the system's obviously failing rape victims when many find the legal process overlong and more harrowing than the original offence?
Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Honourable Lady for her interest in this matter. It's something that she and I have discussed for many years as colleagues on the Justice Select Committee. It is important that justice is given as speedily as possible. We know that. Digging into the attrition of victims in cases, particularly of rape, is very salutary and one of the reasons why the government has increased the money available to support victims by fourfold in recent times. On the law tour next week, which is Solicitor General reference, we will be visiting an ISFA in Nottingham. And we know that where a victim has support, they are 50% less likely to withdraw from proceedings.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've heard from many women in my constituency who've been victims of domestic violence and abuse. They've reported it to the police, but they're still not getting the support or the justice they deserved. Rather than warm words, can the Attorney-General explain why the number of charges for domestic abuse and violence has not just failed to keep pace with the rise in reported offences, but has gone so dramatically backwards?
I thank the Honourable Lady for her interest in this matter as well. And I think far more than warm words are being provided by the government. What we've been working on very closely is real joint working between the CPS and the police. We know that this has significantly increased the number of successful prosecutions in RASO cases. We're now rolling out a similar but not identical form of working in domestic abuse cases, and I think the Honourable Lady will be pleased to know that in her CPS area, the volume of adult rape suspects charged has gone up 41% in the last year.
Chair of the Select Committee's Robert Neal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Attorney agree that it's important to remember that when there is sufficient evidence to put a case before a jury, the conviction rate for rapes and serious sexual offences is entirely consistent and on a par with that for other serious offences of violence? Isn't the real challenge to ensure that the file quality of evidence presented by the police to the Crown Prosecution Service is sufficient to bring charges in the first place? That's the issue that was highlighted in the Joint Inspection Report. Isn't that where we should be paying our most attention?
Attorney General.
Well, this is a Justice Select Committee alumni session, and it's always good to hear from our chair. He makes, of course, Mr. Speaker, as we would all expect, an important point. It is very true that if the CPS can only prosecute the cases that are referred to them, they then work out which ones to prosecute using a two-stage legal test. If you strip out the guilty pleas, they're running at a conviction rate of between 50 and 60%. They always prosecute where there's sufficient evidence, and it is in the public interest to do so.
Elaine Saxby.
Question 6, please, Mr. Speaker.
Standing on this one, you're standing before. Let's come to the Shadow Minister.
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, the Attorney has been discussing rape prosecution statistics, and I'd like to ask another question in relation to that, which is that the National World reported last month that there have been 1,600 cases over the past 5 years where a suspect accused of rape and investigated for rape ended up being charged with a lesser offence. Now, we all know that type of undercharging is not uncommon, but the allegation in the National World was that those 1,600 cases were then counted towards the charge rate for rape, even though no one had been charged with a rape offence. So can the Attorney-General tell us whether that is true? And if so, does that mean that the charge rate for rape is even lower than we currently think?
Mr. Speaker, I too saw that report, and I also asked for further clarification of the material within it. And I have been told that for a force to have charged an alternative offence, the facts and the evidence must be extremely similar and must relate to the victim and the circumstances. I have also been told, but I have not dug into every single one of those cases, that some of the reporting that she refers to may relate to historic sexual abuse, and that may explain some of the figures.
Drew Hendry.
Question number 3, Mr. Speaker.
Attorney General.
by long-standing convention, whether the law officers have been asked to provide advice, and the contents of any such advice is not disclosed outside government.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Nearly 200 civil society organisations have, covering human trafficking, modern slavery, asylum and refugees, have called on the government to immediately withdraw the illegal immigration bill because, as it stands, it will breach multiple conventions and agreements in international law. So will the Attorney-General work with her colleagues to revise and review these provisions to change them, or is she happy to underline that hers is a law-breaking government?
As I said, Mr. Speaker, there is a long-standing convention, which means that I cannot go into the legal advice which may or may not have been given. I can say simply that we do consider the bill to be consistent with our international obligations.
SNP spokesperson Stuart C. MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Attorney-General will know that concern has been expressed on both sides of this House that the bill will make it even harder to successfully prosecute traffickers. In short, that's because victims will not come forward if it simply means they're going to be detained and then removed to Rwanda. So what, can I ask, is the Attorney-General going to do about that?
Attorney-General.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry, but once again, I can't go into the content of any legal advice that might have been given. I would, however, refer the honourable gentleman to the explanatory notes which accompanied the illegal migration bill, which do set out the circumstances in which ECAT is operating at the moment.
Sir Desmond Swin.
Sir.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the SFO has implemented wide-ranging reforms following the recommendations made by Sir David Calvert-Smith and Brian Altman KC. The SFO's strategic plan sets out a programme to modernise, build on capabilities and protect the UK's reputation as a safe place to do business.
Sir Desmond.
Just how much detail will he require to properly implement Sir David's recommendation on oversight? We do need to keep a tight rein on the remaining tenure of the current director, don't we?
Minister.
Well, as ever, I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for his question, and I'm sure he will have seen the written ministerial statement that was laid before this House yesterday. And of course, the update confirmed that the planned review is ongoing. Additionally, since April of this year, case lists prepared for superintendents' meetings include all cases that may have required case consent, and importantly, there is more explicit signposting to high-risk cases.
Shadow Minister Andy Swalter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Could we talk about the fraud strategy, which sadly is itself a bit of a fraud? As revealed by Spotlight on Corruption, the new National Fraud Squad is patched together with £100 million already announced last year and 400 officers, up to 300 of whom already in post. No new money, precious few new staff. How on earth is that going to make a dent in the £6.8 billion a year lost to consumer fraud, let alone the £21 billion a year in public sector fraud his government lets run rife?
Minister.
Well, I'm very sorry that the honourable gentleman doesn't welcome the strategy. He was calling for it, and indeed the Shadow Attorney-General was calling for it at the last AGO's questions. We promised that it would be delivered soon. I remember that exchange, and indeed it was delivered soon after these questions. He will know that that strategy sits within the Home Office. That is absolutely right, and I will continue to work with the Home Office on the fraud strategy, and I'm sure he will be pleased, as my right honourable friend was, with the written ministerial statement yesterday, specifically on the subject of this question.
Lynn Saxby.
Question 6, please, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, with permission, I'll answer questions 6 and 8 together. We're committed to increasing the volumes of prosecutions and supporting more victims of domestic abuse. For example, we've now ensured that victims now have much longer to report offences.
Lynn Saxby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can my right honourable friend outline what is being done to encourage the reporting of rape and sexual assault in rural areas where victims may be less likely to report these crimes due to distant support services?
The Honourable Lady is a great champion for her rural area. She will be pleased to know that in the CPS area of South West England, we consistently see one of the highest conviction rates for rape and domestic abuse. Her area is covered by Operation Soteria, which is testing new ways of working between the police and the CPS.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The breakdown in relationships, particularly from women in families from the Indian subcontinent, is a stigma, and many women are either forced to remain in a coercive relationship or forced to return to that abuser. What measures could my right honourable friend take to ensure that those women affected in that way are given full support through the Crown Prosecution Service and indeed assisted to rebuild their lives?
The Honourable Gentleman is a great campaigner for Harrow East and for all of the communities that live there. He'll be pleased to know that CPS London are also working hard, and this week they're holding an event in his constituency to develop the Domestic Abuse Joint Justice Plan, where colleagues from across the criminal justice system will come together to increase prosecutions in the cases that he's outlined.
Andrew Bridgen.
Number 7, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Bill includes provisions to extend the SFO's pre-investigative powers, allowing them to compel people to furnish the SFO with information earlier in cases of domestic corruption and fraud.
Andrew Bridgen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for his answer. Would he agree to meet with me and a number of whistleblowers at his earliest convenience, and we will provide him with evidence of corruption and fraud in financial institutions, financial regulators and the judiciary?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the FCA has published guidelines in July 2017, referring back to the money laundering regulations in 2017, and that is right. And he might want to direct his inquiries towards the Economic Secretary to the Treasury in relation to his substantive questions about prosecutions. Of course, it's right that both the SFO and the CPS operate independently. The Attorney-General is responsible for safeguarding that independence, and she takes that role incredibly seriously.
Andrew Ladson.
Question 9.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the Attorney-General laid a written ministerial statement outlining the progress made on the delivery recommendations made by Sir David, and these demonstrate a significant progress in implementing all 29 recommendations.
Andrew.
Thank you, sir. A constituent of mine whose husband was a very powerful and strong professional footballer had all of his life's savings and investments defrauded in a huge organised fraudulent scam. And since then, in spite of his losses and being the victim, he and many of his colleagues have been pushed to absolute bankruptcy by further claims from other government departments for consequential taxes and so on already fraudulent activities. Can my honourable friend tell me what more he can do to make sure that government departments don't further punish those victims?
I'm very grateful indeed to my right honourable friend for raising this case. She's right to do so, and I know that the Attorney-General is also familiar herself with the details of this case. Mr. Speaker, may I just note one thing that may be of relevance and help my right honourable friend? The CPS has recovered assets worth £480 million through confiscation orders, and in terms of victims, £105 million of that has been returned to victims of crime by way of compensation.
Jeff Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question 10.
Attorney-General.
I'm honoured as Attorney-General to play an important role in upholding the rule of law, which is fundamental to our Constitution. I'd like to thank the House of Lords Constitution Committee for its report. The Government published its response in March, and I'm looking forward to appearing before the committee next month.
Jeff Smith.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, the Constitution Committee said, and I quote, "The Government has twice knowingly introduced legislation which would breach the UK's international obligations and, in doing so, undermined the rule of law." They were referring to the Internal Market Bill and the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill. Does she accept that the Illegal Migration Bill is now the third such example and the first on this Attorney-General's watch?
Attorney-General.
No, I don't accept that. I am bound by the Law Officers Convention mentioned earlier, so that I can't comment on advice, even if it were provided by previous law officers. With regard to the two earlier bills he mentioned, the Government has published summaries of its legal position during the introduction of both those bills, and more recently in February this year on the Windsor Framework.
That completes questions. Those who wish to leave before we come to urgent questions. Go for it.